right, we're in Romans chapter 13, and we're starting with verse 11. And it says that knowing the time, that now it is high time to wake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believe. Time is, when you get into the subject of time, it's quite controversial. There's a great deal of study in time. You can spend a long time in time in that life, and it'll probably take us some time to get through time. So we'll try to see what we can do in this. I asked the question, who created time? We got a good answer. God did, and that's exactly right in this. We see that the universe is. That's the biggest we'll ever know. And that now the thing with time, a lot of people have the idea that God doesn't abide by time. That God can change time.
Early in the Bible there, the person walked with God and God took it.
Yes. And we have now with time that God does abide by time. He can change it when He wants to, but He also set up time to use it as a means of organizing, as a means of identifying different events, and of what He will plan to do and what He will be doing involved with this. And so, as we look at this, He made the divisions of time, the days, nights, weeks, months, and years. And of course, we see this is done, as we'll see in a moment, by God. Now, as to what we have today, and the divisions we have today, man has devised that and work it. But the principle of time, God set up in the very beginning. And so, God has a universal clock. He set it up in the very beginning, as we'll look at the scriptures in a moment. When He created this earth, in that the rotation of the earth on its axis, it takes it 24 hours to rotate to make one rotation as far as our division on them. But we see that God set up the time and say that when the earth completes one rotation, then that's one day involved with that. And so God designed time by the way He created the earth. God told us how to divide time in Genesis 1:5, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So it's not us shaking and saying, well, normally we'll say the daytime is one day, then we have night, then the next daytime on that. No, God said evening and morning. So a day consists of a complete rotation going through the daylight hours and the dark involved with that, which we see today in our division with 24 hours. Now, we find in Genesis 1:14 where God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. So God set this up as the basis of understanding time and how to deal with time. And He set it up, and so how do we measure time? Well, He measures, it says you're measured by the lights in the firmament, or in the heavens. That's by the earth, by the moon, by the stars, and all that's involved with this. And God set that up as to be the measurement of time. And so as we look at this, we want to examine it a little bit further, to divide the day from the night, and for signs and seasons, in that in so many orbits around the sun, or so many around this. You have your different months with the orbit of the moon around the earth, and then of your winter and summer. And so all of these are determined by the creation of God in creating the earth and its rotation, and the sun and all that's involved in the planets. Every bit of it was, as God created this, is used by God to reveal time for us. And so as we look at this, the hours of the day is the rotation of the earth on its axis. And then the number of days and years by the orbit of the earth around the sun. And so every time the earth makes one complete orbit, then that is 1 year. This is what God set up, not man doing that. But on that basis, now man has created all kinds of measuring instruments involved in that. Whether we have clocks, or whether we have an hourglass, or whether we have a sundial, or whether we have the clocks that would make the division of time is done by battery or wind up or by chemicals or whatever else is involved in that. And still yet, it's all based on the fact of the rotation of the earth and how you would divide that up and calculate that. And God says that gives us a day. And of course, as you divide it up into hours and minutes. Some of them would call it something else, but it's all based on the same principle that's involved with that. And then the rotation, the orbit of the Earth around the sun gives us the time of the year. Now, the moon that orbits around the Earth allows us to figure the months. Now, when the Earth makes one orbit around the sun, in one orbit, it rotates 365 times on its axis. That's where we get 365 days a year. Now, I'm using round figures. When you get into the real details of it, it's going to come down. One will say 365 plus this or that or so on. But we're just going to talk in round figures in general terms in dealing with this, and so that you get a concept of time itself and what's involved with it. And so the moon, in its orbit around, determines a month. And that moon will orbit the Earth 12 times in one orbit of the Earth around the sun. And so that's where we get our 12 months. And we figure that, and all of it based upon God's universal clock and His creation on this. How it's divided up and what names we give it, what names of the months and all that, man does that. And God has named some of them for them, especially with the Hebrews, and declaring their months and naming those. But there's about, I think there's about 20 active calendars in our world today that are all different. They start at different times. January is not January to them. It's a different name, different part. They have different parts of it. Some of them have different how many days are in a month. That's involved with that as their calculation of the earth, of the moon going around the earth. And so you've got all that going on today. I have a commentary that at the beginning of each chapter, the commentator tells what day it is in all the different calendars. So here's an introduction to that chapter, a big list of all the calendars saying what time it is or what day it is according to those particular calendars in there. And so that would vary, but it's all based upon the same principle of the rotation of the earth, of the orbit of the moon, and then the orbit of the earth around the sun. And so time is not something that, now a lot of people today would want to ignore time. It's not important, but God says it is. And we'll see that later on. And you might ignore time all you want to, but it doesn't have any effect on time. Time's still going to go on. And time goes by. So as we look at that, now we see the orbit of the earth around the sun is equal to 1 year. So the orbit around the sun is 1 year. Now, here's Neptune. For Neptune to make one orbit around the sun, so on Neptune the time would be declared, a year on Neptune would be one orbit around the sun. Are you getting that? Just like we got time zones. Now right now in South Korea, it's after midnight. In Vancouver, where AJ's at, it's a little after 7 in the morning. And Berto's on the same time with us down in Texas, and that line. But now, when you think about this, for Neptune to make one orbit, Earth makes 248 orbits around the sun. So for 1 year to pass on Neptune, 248 years will pass on Earth. In that. So it's your perspective of time, of how you look at it, and where you're looking at it from. Whether you're on Neptune or whether you're in some other location throughout the universe involved with that. But still, God abides and God calculates by these different times and working in that. So now we find in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8, where the Bible tells us, "But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day." Now, let me back up here just a little bit. In Romans, in our text, it says, knowing the time. What time? We have earth's time. That's what we're talking about here. Now we're going to talk about heaven's time. You have, just like you have Neptune's time and earth's time, now you've got heaven's time and also earth's time. And here the Bible tells us we're not to be ignorant of that fact. I have a lot of people, as we get into these days, say, what difference does it make? Well, God says it does make a difference if you're going to understand what God is doing and all that He will be doing and what He has done in the past. To understand that, you need to understand time. And that's what our lesson is about, knowing the time. And this is very important as we get deeper into the Word of God. Now, in heaven's time, it says that one day with the Lord, one day in heaven, is 1,000 years on the earth. So now let's see if we can get our little diagram up here. 1,000 years. Now, one day in heaven, so I put this up here from out there in space somewhere. We don't know where heaven is. It's far enough away. It's far enough away that for one day, not 1 year, but one day to pass on heaven, the earth will make 1,000 revolutions around the sun on that part. And so now we see our Milky Way, and then our solar system, our sun with its planets. You've got a time involved with the planets going around the sun, and especially Earth's time. Then you've got a time involved with our sun going around the center of our Milky Way with the others. And so you've got different time zones involved in this. And somewhere out here, where God is, on His planet, and that for one day to pass, 1,000 years will pass. And so you've got Earth making 1,000 revolutions for just one day to pass in heaven. And so when we talk about a person leaving this earth and going to heaven, if he spends one day in heaven, 1,000 years have expired on the earth. So when you think about that from heaven's viewpoint, time is just, our time on the earth is just a vapor.
But Jerry, we're just going to slow down and take it easy and enjoy it, aren't we?
Yes, we will. We'll be busy, but as far as slow as what is here.
I don't understand what's
yes,
going
we'll, to that point, but
it's going to be good.
it's going to be great.
Not think great.
Involved in that. But this helps us to understand some things. People say, well, I know my loved ones in heaven. You know, when I get there. Well, if they died 500 years ago, they've only aged a half a day. If they died 10 years ago, they just hardly there. I can see a mother up there just getting into heaven. She was in an accident and left her children behind, and she asked the Lord, well, what about my family? He said, turn around, they're right behind you. Just a few seconds, heaven's time. It might be 50 years earth time, but just a few seconds heaven's time. So in getting that concept of what is there and recognizing the time, one of the things about time, I was, my senior year in high school in Texas, I was preaching at a church I preached on the second and fourth Sunday of the month at this little church, and I had another one I preached on the first Sunday and the third Sunday. This one I preached at on the second and fourth Sunday was out in the woods, out in the rural area, there in central Texas. And to get to that church, I had to drive on just a one-lane, two-rut, sandy road. In that, to get there, and hope we didn't meet anybody coming down the other way on that. Well, the church, of course, there was no electricity or anything. This is back in the 50s. And out there, they hadn't had electricity. There was a little community store, and then the houses were scattered all around, and had a little gas pump. One of those kind that you cranked it and got the gasoline up in the glass container at the top, and then by gravity it would come down and fill up your car for how many gallons you need in it. And every now and then they would fill up my gas tank for part of my pay of going out there and preaching. A lot of times I'd get 5 pounds of sugar, and maybe the next Sunday I might get something else as far as food, and that was my pay in preaching at that church. Well, we had two women. They were sisters. They were never been married. They were up in years, and they lived together. And they lived behind wouldn't say a hill. It was a large hill in that line. It wasn't quite a mountain, but a hill, big old hill there. And so they would set their clocks, and every time I'd show up to the house, they'd tell me I was either late or ahead of time, and I was never on their time. And I got checked, and I said, well, what are you doing? What kind of clock do you have? They showed me. They had one of those that you wind up. And said, now, we get the paper in the evening, and it tells us when the sun rises in the morning, what time the sun rises. And so we set our clock by the sunrise. By the time it gets over that hill is when they think the sun rises. And so their time is never with the rest of our time. But after either getting them up or something else on that, they finally just set it about whatever time I got there to pick them up and take them to church. So you've got different time elements as far as where you might be in your time zones and involved with that. And so now, as we look at the matter of earth time, in which God abides by that, heaven's time, and God abides by that, but then God has a time for Israel, has a calendar, and calculates the time with Israel. And this is found in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 through 27. This has a popular name of Daniel's 70 weeks. A lot of people talk about that, and a lot of people have big questions about it. They don't understand the 70 weeks of Daniel. And so we want to try to help you to understand a little bit what's involved in it. I'm going to explain the process, and then we'll go through and look at the scriptures as we look at what God considers the time of Israel. Now, we know the promise that was made to Abraham, that he would have a great nation. And this nation would be known as Israel, where Jacob's name was changed to Israel. It would be a nation that would rule the world. And one day the Son of God, the Messiah, would come and be the king of this nation and would rule the entire world. Well, as time developed with this, and God developed this nation as he brought them out of Egypt, and with millions of people, brought them into the land that he promised them, and then they began to have a king, and King David came along, and God promised King David that his son, God's son, would be of the lineage of David and would reign on David's throne for 1,000 years on this earth, ruling the entire world. And this is what they looked forward to, that they would be the king of the world. Well, as Israel under David's rule was making great progress, his son Solomon came on the throne, one of the richest men of the earth on this. And my, what was happening with that, but Solomon didn't stay true to God. And he had many wives. When he built the temple, as God allowed him to do, he had additions to the temple that God had given him the instructions to build for the different religions of all of his wives. He was compromising.
The first one he married was Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah. And so involved with that, Israel began to go away from God. And as Israel rebelled, God took them out of the land and scattered them among the nations. Israel was no longer a nation recognized by the world. But God kept promising them and said, Israel will be the ruling nation of the world. I will bring Israel back. I will restore Israel as a great nation. My son, known as the Messiah, as the Savior, will rule on David's throne, and you'll have peace for 1,000 years on this earth before it's destroyed. And so this promise was made. Well, while they were scattered, they wondered about that. When will this happen? When will we be brought back? When will Israel be recognized as a nation again? And God told Daniel there'll be 70 weeks that will pass. And at the end of that 70 weeks, I will fulfill my promise. And so they wanted to know, well, how long is a week? Is it 7 days? Is it a week? Is it 7 years or what? So now, well, over the time we have found that those 70 weeks represents, each week represents 7 years on that. Now, when do they start? When will this happen? When will the time come for the 1,000-year reign of Jesus and where the world will be ruled from the area that we know of Israel today, and there at that, as the world is ruled from there, with Jesus as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. When will this happen? When will the 70 weeks start up to that particular time? This is what Daniel is dealing with, what God has shown us through Daniel. And so we find that in this, God told that when the command would be given to restore Jerusalem, and this was, we have the record of that command made in Ezra chapter 7, verses 11 through 26, and chapter 9, verse 9. That was in 451 BC. That's the starting day of the first week of these 70 weeks of Daniel. Then in this prophecy, he said, in the 69th week of that time, the Messiah will be cut off. That's talking about Jesus will come in the 69th week. He will be crucified, and then there will be a period of time between the 69th week and the 70th week. And so we find the first 69 weeks were literally came to pass, which was 483 years. Jesus came during that 69th week. And he was crucified, just as it was prophesied with Daniel in that 69th week. Now for the 70th week to happen, the disciples thought after Jesus was raised, now will you establish the kingdom? You know, that was the first question they asked after he was raised in dealing with this. Now will you do that? No, there's a pause between the first 69 weeks and the 70th week. And so there's a pause there. We do not know at that time. Now, just as I've said before, you'll see it tonight. Many people will witness it. You've been watching basketball games, so my wife watches those, and I'll come in and there'll be about 2 minutes left in the game. And man, it's real close, and I'll stand there and I'll say, well, I'll watch that. I've got something to do in 5 minutes. In 2 minutes, it'll be done, you know, on that time.
30 minutes.
And I'm there 30 minutes, sometimes 45 minutes. Why? Because you have time out. When you have time out, the game clock stops, though my clock keeps going.
My Cowboys got me.
And so,
This time.
right now, the game clock
Never played
on
on
Israel, the game clock on Israel stopped at the crucifixion of Christ. Are you getting the picture? The game clock on Israel stopped. How long will it pause? Say, when will it start again on that? Now, there's sometimes when they go to have time out in a ball game, there's supposed to be a certain limit of time, especially if a team calls time out and they start the ball game up again. I'll look at my watch and say, well, maybe they'll get started here. But if they're reviewing a play, it can last longer than that. And it's up to the referees when to start the clock up again. It's up to God when this 70th week, which is the last 7 years of the time of Israel, when they will be restored and become that nation again. And so, during that pause, we have the church age. We're in that pause right now. The first 69 weeks of Daniel have been fulfilled. We're in the pause. We're waiting for the 70th week, and during that time, the church has been established. The church does not replace Israel. The church becomes the bride of Christ. It's the body of Christ. And so, as we look at this, now in the meantime, during this pause, Israel is still scattered. What we find as we look at this, just prior to the time this clock will start again, of the 70th week, Israel will be brought back into the land, established as a nation again. And the land will be developed. And so we can know that it's getting time close to start. Now, in some ball games, the referee will remind the team, your time's about up, we're about to start the game again. In football, you'll remind the coaches, it's about time to start again. We've had time out, it's about time to start again. God will remind us that we're near this time for this 70th week to start again. And what starts it is the rapture. And at the rapture, we'll be taken out. This 70th week will begin, and Daniel's 70 weeks, that's 7 years. This is the time of the tribulation period. Now, as far as heaven is concerned, that's but a moment. This 1,000-year reign is how long in heaven? One day.
One day.
This is known as the day of the Lord. It starts at the conclusion of this 70th week of Daniel, which is 7 years earth time in just a moment, which will be the rapture, the tribulation period, and then we come back with Christ, and that concludes the 70th week of Daniel, and then Israel is the ruling nation of the world. So this is God's time of Israel. And we're to know that time. That's what we're dealing with in Romans. Knowing the time. How do you know what to do and how do you know what's going on? If you don't know the time, you're not going to. It's very important that you know the time, especially of Israel, in working with this. And so now we want to look at that and the scriptures on that. Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city to finish the transgressions and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Man, what a prophecy. And so this is what we've just been talking about. He said, now 70 weeks are to determine all of this. During that 70 weeks, when it starts, and the latter part of it, there'll be a finish to they'll finish the transgressions, they'll make an end of sins, they'll make reconciliation for iniquity, they'll bring in everlasting righteousness, and they'll seal up the vision and prophecy on them. Now it goes on to say in verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That's 69 weeks. And the streets shall be built again, and the wall even in troubled times. So here he's telling us that from the going forth of the commandment, when the commandment is given to restore Jerusalem, build the temple, that there'll be 69 weeks, and as this goes on, then what's going to happen during that 69 weeks? Now let me just pause here, and so we get the picture of Abraham and of the nation of Israel. They've been scattered. When will this time happen for them to reign, for Jesus to reign? There'll be 69 weeks. Actually 70, but 69. During that 69th week, what happens? It starts with the command to restore Jerusalem and Ezra. That's when Christ comes back at the end of that, and he is crucified. So let's take a look at that now. We have the pause, and then the 70th week will continue later on in this. This will be at the time of the rapture. So now in verse 24, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, upon the holy city, to finish the transgressions, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy. Verse 26, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. This is talking about his crucifixion, but not for himself. And the people of the prince shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, 70 A.D., Jerusalem was destroyed, and the end thereof shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. This is in the 70th week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice of the oblation to cease, and the overspreading of the abomination he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Now, what a mouthful that is there. But understanding the time is important involved in this. Now, let's look at that 24th verse again. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgressions, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision. Now, let's take a look at that again. So we have the promise made to Abraham to have a great nation. That nation rebelled, scattered among the world. Daniel gives the prophecy. God said Jesus will come back and will reign on David's throne. How do we know when that will happen? It'll be 70 weeks. The first 69 weeks, 483 years, it started in 451 BC, somewhere along in there, and the command to restore Jerusalem in Ezra 7 11 through 26, Christ came. Now, as he came at this time, in that January, 70 weeks are determined at the coming of Christ, it said in that verse, to finish the transgressions and make an end of sins. And that's what Jesus did on the cross. That's where he sacrificed his blood for us. Now, what a tremendous thing, exactly as God said would. The second thing that would happen at this particular time of that is to make reconciliation for iniquity. You cannot make yourself right with God. You can join all the churches you want to, it's not going to make you right with God. You can go through all the baptism waters, and it's not going to make you right with God. You can be as religious as you want to be, and it's not going to make you right with God. The only thing that makes you right with God is Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Amen.
And so to do that, this was fulfilled. Now, in this pause, between the 6th and 9th week and the 70th week, we have the development of the church to be the bride of Christ. At the 70th week, which starts with the rapture, then, and at the end of that, we have Christ coming back and completes this. So now it says, to bring in everlasting righteousness. At the end of that 70th week, the everlasting righteousness, Jesus will go into Jerusalem. Exactly as he said he would. And this will happen. He'll keep his word in that. And then not only that, it said to anoint the most holy. Right now, Jesus is a curse word in this whole world. He'll be anointed as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And what a time that's going to be. And so, this is something that is of tremendous importance. And you'll not be aware of all of this unless you know the time. If you don't know the time, you're going to be going around in the dark. That's it.
Where does the year 1948 come in and Israel is made a nation again? What is that?
Okay? This deals right in here in bringing Israel back just before the 70th week on that, before the rapture on that. Here, let me bring that up. This is what we're going to deal with. This deals with the time of the Gentiles. And God allows us to know this. And so now we have the timeline. Abraham, first coming of Christ, the church age, the rapture, tribulation period, second coming, 1,000-year reign, earth destroyed. Now, we're to discern the signs of the times. Jesus said you're a hypocrite if you don't know the signs of the time on this. Now, what signs are there to let us know what time we're in? We have the signs of the last days. That's to let us know we're in the last days, the last 1,000 years, before the last day of this earth when Jesus reigns on the throne. Because after this day, the earth is destroyed, after the 1,000 years. So we're in the last days. The signs of that, wars, storms, disaster of nature. I mean, it's wicked during this time. Perilous times on there. Those signs are being fulfilled to let us know we're in the last days on that. We don't have another 5,000 years out there. We're in the last days. Then we have the signs of the rapture to let us know we're right here at this time at the beginning of the 70th week. What signs are there of the rapture? Those signs is the falling away of the churches. We're seeing that today. See? Then you have the signs of Israel to tell us when we're in the last, just before the rapture. The signs of Israel, the first one, or one of them, is the Valley of the Dry Bones. And the Valley of the Dry Bones is a sign prophesying that Israel will once again be recognized as a nation of the world. It's in two parts. The first part tells about the development of Israel. This began in 1948. When Israel was recognized as a nation, and right now they are a great nation, but they don't have the spiritual breath. For that spiritual breath, the second part of that prophecy happens after the rapture. So we're right here. This is a sign telling us of Israel there. Another sign of Israel, the development of the nation here, 1948. Another sign of Israel is the budding of the fig tree. That's the development of the land. That started in 1948. And so these two signs here, we're seeing that, and that it started in 1948 to let us know that we're right at this time of the rapture, at the beginning of the 70th week is about to happen. It could have happened 10 years ago. It could happen today. Let's start with that. Because these signs are being fulfilled. And then you have the sign of Israel, the rebuilding of the temple. That doesn't have to be done before the rapture. That will be done, have to be done 3.5 years after the rapture, but it could start today. And then you have the signs of Noah, which is wickedness. And brother, we're in a wicked time right now. Then you have the signs of Lot. And this deals with homosexual and lesbians. And we're in that time right now.
Lot's wife that turned into a pillar of salt.
She sure was. And then you have the signs of the second coming. So knowing the times and discerning the times, the second coming, that's the signs of the tribulation period. Revelation chapter 9 through, chapter 6 probably through 19. And then you have the signs of the end of the world. The signs of the end of the world are the signs that will tell us when it's time for this little world to come to an end. And that's when Satan is loosed after 1,000 years. That's after the 1,000-year reign of Christ, when the lion will lay down with the lamb and so on, involved with them. Now,